At just 19 years old, Michael Tisius walked into a small Missouri jail and shot two unarmed corrections officers execution style. He was captured later that day after the failed jailbreak that left Leon Egley and Jason Acton dead for nothing. 23 years later, on a humid June evening in 2023, that same man would face his final hours. The Missouri State Penitentiary in Bonne Terre prepared for what would become one of the state's most controversial executions. The case had everything: a teenager's split-second decision that destroyed lives, two dedicated public servants gunned down in cold blood, a legal battle that stretched across decades. But this story isn't just about the crime that shocked a small Missouri community. It's about last words that carried the weight of decades behind bars, a final meal that revealed the man behind the monster, and an execution that left even some of his original jurors questioning whether justice had truly been served. The clock was ticking, the needle was waiting, and Michael Tisius was running out of time. The night shift at Randolph County Jail began like any other. June 22, 2000. Early morning hours. The small facility in Huntsville, Missouri sat quiet under the darkness. Leon Egley and Jason Acton had settled into their routine. Two dedicated jailers working the overnight shift. The kind of shift where nothing happens until everything does. Leon Egley was 53 years old, a veteran of law enforcement. He'd spent years serving his community in various capacities before landing at the county jail. Steady work, honest pay. Jason Acton was younger at 31, also committed to the job. Both men knew the inmates, knew the routines, knew how to handle the small-time offenders who cycled through their facility. The Randolph County Jail wasn't some maximum security fortress. It was a modest county lockup, the kind that housed misdemeanor offenders and people awaiting trial. DUI cases, domestic disputes, petty theft, nothing that required heavy security. The jailers weren't armed. They didn't expect violence. Why would they? Michael Tisius was already inside. He'd been booked on a misdemeanor charge. Nothing serious. The kind of case that would normally result in a fine or probation. But Tisius had found purpose in his incarceration. He'd formed a bond with another inmate, Roy Vance. Vance was facing more serious charges. Vance needed help, and Tisius was willing to provide it. The relationship between Tisius and Vance wasn't random. They'd grown close during their time in the facility, close enough that Tisius was willing to risk everything to help Vance escape. The plan had been forming for days, maybe weeks. Tisius knew the jail's layout. He'd observed the routines. He understood the vulnerabilities. Being housed in the facility gave Tisius unprecedented access. He wasn't breaking in. He was already inside. He knew when the jailers made their rounds. He knew where they kept their keys. He knew the blind spots, the quiet corners, the moments when the facility was most vulnerable. The overnight shift was perfect. Minimal staff, maximum opportunity. Egley and Acton were the only barriers between Vance and freedom. Two unarmed men doing their jobs, following protocols designed for handling minor offenders, not dealing with someone willing to kill. Tisius had acquired a weapon. How exactly remains part of the investigation record. But on that early morning in June, he was armed and ready. The escape plan was simple. Overpower the jailers, get the keys, walk out. But simple plans rarely survive contact with reality. The confrontation began suddenly. Egley and Acton encountered Tisius during what should have been a routine check. They saw the weapon. They recognized the threat. These weren't rookie corrections officers. They'd been trained. They knew how to de-escalate. They attempted to talk Tisius down. Both jailers responded professionally. They followed their training. They tried to contain the situation. Egley and Acton weren't looking for a fight. They were trying to prevent one. But Tisius had already made his decision. Violence was his solution. Murder was his method. The first shots shattered the quiet of the overnight shift. Egley went down, then Acton. Two men who'd shown up to work expecting another routine night. Two men who'd never see their families again. The sound of gunfire echoed through the small facility. Other inmates heard it. Some would later testify about what they witnessed. Tisius didn't hesitate between shots. This wasn't a moment of panic. It was execution. Deliberate, calculated, final. Both jailers were down. Both were dying. The escape route was clear, except it wasn't. Despite the murders, the escape failed. Vance didn't make it out. Neither did Tisius. The plan that had cost 2 lives accomplished nothing. The jailers were dead for no reason. Their sacrifice had prevented nothing. Their murders had achieved nothing. The scene left behind was devastating. 2 bodies, blood on the floor, keys scattered. The overnight shift that had started in quiet routine had ended in chaos and death. The small county jail that had never experienced serious violence was now a crime scene. Other inmates were secured. Staff was called in. The facility went into lockdown. But it was too late for Egley and Acton. They were already gone. 2 men who dedicated their careers to public service. 2 men who died trying to do their jobs. The impact was immediate. The jail's operations were disrupted. Security protocols were questioned. The community was shaken. Small-town law enforcement facilities weren't supposed to experience this level of violence. But that night, the unthinkable had happened. The shots had been fired. The jailers were down. But the discovery wouldn't come immediately. The overnight shift at a small county jail operates on routine checks, scheduled rounds, predictable patterns. When those patterns are disrupted, it takes time for the disruption to be noticed. The timeline between the murders and their discovery stretched through the early morning hours. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The facility's quiet returned after the gunfire. But it was a different kind of quiet, the quiet of death, the quiet of lives ended. When the bodies were finally discovered, the scene was unmistakable. Leon Egley and Jason Acton were found where they'd fallen. Gunshot wounds, blood loss, no signs of life. The responding officers, who first arrived at the scene later, described it as one of the worst they'd encountered. Both victims were found in positions that told the story. They'd been caught during their duties. Egley was discovered near the cell blocks. Acton was found in a different location. The physical evidence suggested they'd tried to respond to the threat. They'd attempted to maintain control. They'd failed not because of any shortcoming on their part, but because they'd been outgunned. Early indicators pointed to an escape attempt gone wrong. The positioning of the bodies, the location of spent shell casings, the evidence that cells had been accessed. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a planned attack with a specific purpose, a purpose that had ultimately failed. First responders arrived at the Randolph County Jail within minutes of the discovery. Local law enforcement, state police, county sheriff's deputies. The small facility was suddenly swarming with personnel. Crime scene tape went up. Evidence collection began. The quiet country jail had become the center of a major investigation. Leon Egley showed no signs of life. Jason Acton was also beyond help. The severity of their gunshot wounds had been fatal. Both men had died from their injuries. Life-saving efforts were attempted but proved futile. The rural location of Huntsville, Missouri created additional challenges for the emergency response. This wasn't a major metropolitan area with trauma centers nearby. The nearest hospital was miles away. The nearest major medical facility was even farther. But distance wouldn't have mattered. Both victims had died at the scene. Medical personnel officially pronounced both jailers dead. Time of death was established. The coroner was contacted. The bodies would need to be transported for autopsy. The crime scene would need to be processed. The investigation would need to begin in earnest. Initial investigation findings confirmed the obvious. This had been an escape attempt. The physical evidence would tell the story even if witnesses couldn't or wouldn't. Early leads pointed directly to Michael Tisius. His cell was empty. He was unaccounted for. Other inmates identified him as the perpetrator. The evidence was overwhelming even in the first hours of the investigation. This wasn't going to be a whodunit. This was going to be about building a case that would stick. The shock to Huntsville was immediate and profound. This was a small Missouri community where everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where violent crime was rare, where corrections officers weren't expecting to be murdered on the job. The loss of Egley and Acton hit the entire community. The Randolph County Sheriff's Department was devastated. They'd lost two of their own. Two men who'd been serving their community faithfully. Two men who'd been doing their jobs when they were killed. The department would need to process the loss while simultaneously investigating the murders. Immediate security measures were implemented. Additional staff was called in. Protocols were reviewed. The jail's operations were suspended pending the investigation. No one was taking any chances. The facility that had seemed secure enough for small-time offenders was now recognized as a potential death trap. Media attention began almost immediately. Local news outlets arrived. State media picked up the story. The murders of two corrections officers in a small Missouri jail was news. The failed escape attempt that had cost two lives was a story that would resonate far beyond Randolph County. The manhunt for Tisius began within hours. Law enforcement agencies across the region were notified. Airports were alerted. Highways were monitored. The search for the escaped murder suspect became a multi-agency operation. Every resource available was deployed to find Michael Tisius before he could kill again. The forensic examination of the Randolph County Jail revealed a wealth of evidence. Blood spatter patterns confirmed the shooting locations. Shell casings provided ballistics information. Fingerprints on doors and keys showed Tisius's movements through the facility. The ballistics evidence was particularly damning. The bullets recovered from both victims matched the weapon found at the scene. Gunshot residue on Tisius's clothing provided additional confirmation. The physical evidence painted a clear picture of premeditated murder. Law enforcement agencies launched an intensive manhunt. Tisius was considered armed and extremely dangerous. Roadblocks were established. Airports were monitored. The search expanded across multiple counties as investigators tried to predict his movements. The manhunt ended when Tisius was captured trying to flee the area. He was found in possession of evidence linking him to the murders. His clothing still showed gunshot residue. His fingerprints were throughout the crime scene. The case against him was overwhelming. During initial interrogation, Tisius confessed to the killings. He admitted to shooting both jailers. He explained his motive, helping Roy Vance escape from custody. He provided details about the planning and execution that matched the physical evidence perfectly. Michael Tisius was formally charged with 2 counts of capital murder. The prosecution's case was built on overwhelming evidence. His confession, physical evidence from the crime scene, ballistics matching, and eyewitness testimony from other inmates. The defense argued that Tisius's youth and troubled background should be considered as mitigating factors. They presented evidence of his difficult childhood and mental health issues. But the prosecution successfully argued that the murders were premeditated and heinous. After years of appeals and legal challenges, including multiple trips through state and federal courts, Tisius's final appeal was rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court. His death sentence was upheld at every level of review. June 6, 2023 marked exactly 23 years since Leon Egley and Jason Acton were murdered. Governor Mike Parson denied Tisius's final clemency petition. Last-minute legal appeals were rejected by the courts. Michael Tisius, now 42 years old, would face execution at the Bonterra prison. Missouri's last meal policy allowed condemned inmates to request a final meal within reasonable limits. Tisius requested 2 bacon cheeseburgers, curly fries, regular fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Prison officials noted it was described as his favorite meal. The meal was served several hours before the scheduled execution. Tisius prepared a written final statement expressing remorse. "I am sorry, and not because I am at the end." He claimed to have tried hard to become a better man during his incarceration. He acknowledged his responsibility to the victims' families and expressed gratitude to prison staff and spiritual advisors. The execution procedure began with transport to the execution chamber. Witnesses were arranged according to Missouri protocol. Family members of the victims were present. Media representatives were also in attendance. Tisius was prepared for lethal injection using pentobarbital. At 6:10 p.m. on June 6, 2023, Michael Tisius was pronounced dead. Medical personnel confirmed the time of death. 23 years after murdering 2 corrections officers in a failed escape attempt, justice had finally been served. The families of Leon Egley and Jason Acton could finally have closure, though their loved ones would never return.